Catherine Whitaker pressed her daughter's hand into a stranger's and said, "She is yours now." Amelia did not scream, she did not beg. She had learned a long time ago that both of those things only made it worse. She looked at the man everyone in 3 counties called the Shadow Duke, the man her mother had just sold her to for £600, and she waited for what came next. Because something always came next, it always did. If this story already has your heart, subscribe. Stay till the very end. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Amelia's story travels. The rain had not let up in 3 days. Amelia Whitaker stood in the corridor of Blackwood Estate, with a cloth bag in both hands and mud on the hem of her dress and 6 hours of carriage travel in her bones, and she told herself the same thing she had been telling herself since Thursday morning. When her mother had come into her room with that particular expression, the tight, careful one that meant something irreversible had already been decided. Survive, she told herself, just survive. The bag contained 4 dresses, a journal with a broken clasp, a bundle of dried lavender she had cut herself, and a book of botanical illustrations she'd been given at age 9 by a tutor who stopped coming the following year when her father stopped being able to pay him. Those were the things that were hers. Everything else, the house in Wiltshire, the furniture, the silver her grandmother had left them, had been sold off in pieces over the past 2 years. Now, apparently, they had sold her too. She could hear her mother's voice through the drawing-room door. Trembling, the way it always trembled when Catherine Whitaker was trying very hard not to sound like a woman who knew she had done something she could not undo. £600, Your Grace. That is all I ask. Just the 600 to cover the primary debt, and Edmund will. I am not interested in Edmund Voss's arrangement. The second voice was low. Even. The kind of voice that did not need to raise itself. I agreed to a marriage contract, Mrs. Whitaker, not a negotiation, of course. Yes. Is your daughter here? Silence. She is in the corridor. Footsteps. Amelia took 1 step back, then another. Her heel caught on a seam in the floorboard and she caught herself against the wall. Her heart doing something violent in her chest, her hands tightening on the cloth bag until her knuckles went pale. The door opened. Julian Blackwood was taller than she had imagined. Broader across the shoulders, he wore dark clothing the way some men wore armor, not for fashion, but as a statement. I do not require your approval. His face was angular and still, and his eyes gray. Something close to gray moved directly to her. She felt them land. And then he reached up toward the bell pull beside the door. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She pressed herself back against the wall. Her arms came up over her chest, her chin dropped. Her eyes closed. She braced. The way you braced when you had spent years learning that a raised hand always meant pain. What she heard was not a blow. It was a teacup. The small decorative cup on the hall table, she had caught it with her elbow, hit the floor and shattered. The sound split the silence like a gunshot. Amelia opened her eyes. Julian Blackwood had not moved. He stood exactly where he had been standing. His hand still near the bell pull, his fingers not yet on the cord. He was completely still, looking at her the way a man looks when he has just understood something that changes the entire shape of what he is seeing. He was not looking at the broken cup. He was not looking at her mother, who had appeared in the doorway with an apology already forming on her face. He was looking at Amelia, and his expression was not anger. It was not impatience. It was not pity. It was something she did not have a word for. Something quiet and careful and deeply attentive, like a man reading a document he intends to remember. "Miss Whitaker," he said. His voice had not changed register at all. Still low. "I was reaching for the bell pull to call for tea at him. That is all," he said. She looked at his hand, then at the cord, then at his hand again. Yes," she said. "I beg your—" "You don't need to beg anything," he said. He pulled the cord once, then he stepped back deliberately, with the conscious intention of someone creating distance, and looked down at the broken cup on the floor. "Leave that," he said, to no one yet. "Mrs. Aldcroft will see to it." He said it for her. She understood that, so she would not feel compelled to drop to her knees and clean up the mess she had made of herself. Amelia lowered her arms. Her hands were not steady. Her heart was still doing that violent, irregular thing. But she lowered her arms, and she straightened her spine. And she looked at the man who had just watched her flinch at nothing, and had not said a word about it. "Thank you," she said. It came out quieter than she intended. "Come inside," he said. "You've been standing in that corridor long enough." She had built him into a monster on the 6-hour carriage ride. That was the honest truth of it. She had sat in that rattling coach with her hands folded and her eyes on the floor, and she had constructed Julian Blackwood out of everything she had ever heard said about him. Which was considerable, because people talked about the Shadow Duke the way they talked about bad weather, with a kind of fascinated dread. Always in lowered voices, always with the awareness that you did not want to attract his attention. He had taken over the Blackwood Estate at 28. After his older brother's death under circumstances no one discussed directly. He did not attend the London season. He did not maintain the social rounds expected of a man of his position. He gave substantial sums of money to foundling homes, women's refuges, legal funds for tenants who wanted to dispute their landlords, and he never attended the charity dinners that were supposed to accompany such generosity. He gave the money and did not show up to be thanked for it. 2 men who had cheated his tenants had found their credit destroyed within 6 months. Julian Blackwood had never raised his voice at either of them. He had simply made a series of quiet decisions and let consequence do the rest. Cold, people said. Dangerous. A man whose silences cost more than other men's threats. Amelia had imagined someone massive and careless and loud. Someone who occupied space the way certain men did, as though it had always been theirs and anyone else's presence was a temporary inconvenience. She had not imagined a man who went still when she flinched. She had not imagined someone who told her she didn't need to beg anything. She was not sure what to do with the distance between what she had imagined and what was sitting across from her now in the drawing room, pouring tea with his own hands, while her mother watched with an expression that had not quite settled into anything yet. "The contract is straightforward," Julian said. "Setting the pot down, your mother's debts will be discharged in full. You will take up residence at Blackwood Estate as my wife. You will have full use of the house and grounds." He slid a cup toward her. Not toward her mother. Toward her. "Your personal finances will be entirely separate from mine," he continued. "You will receive an allowance that is yours to manage independently. I will not ask accounting of it." Her mother blinked. "That is very generous, Your Grace." "It is reasonable," he said. He looked at Amelia directly. "I have a few questions I would like to ask you, if you are willing." "Yes," Amelia said. "Do you have conditions of your own?" She blinked. "Conditions," he said again. "Things you require. Things you do not want." The contract should reflect the agreement of both parties. Nobody had asked her that. In 3 days of this being decided around her, over her, about her, nobody had once asked her what she wanted. She looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up. "I would like use of a garden," she said. "I work with medicinal herbs. I need soil and sunlight. There is a kitchen garden that has not been used in 3 years," he said. "It is yours. I would like to bring my books, of course." She paused. This next one was harder. It was the one that mattered most, and the one that would reveal the most. And she had learned that revealing what mattered most was dangerous. But she said it anyway. "I would like a key," she said. "To my room. I would like to be able to lock my own door." The room went quiet. Her mother made a small sound in her throat. Julian Blackwood looked at her steadily. Not with surprise, not with offense. With that same attentive steadiness she was beginning to recognize as simply the way he looked at things he was taking seriously. "You will have a key," he said. "And any member of this household who enters your rooms without knocking first and waiting for an answer will answer to me directly." He paused. "That is not a condition. That is simply how it will be." Amelia held his gaze for a long moment. She nodded. She did not say thank you this time. She did not trust herself to say it without something coming apart in her voice. Edmund Voss arrived that evening without warning or invitation, which was exactly how Edmund Voss did everything. Amelia heard the carriage on the gravel drive and felt her stomach drop before she had consciously identified the sound. Her body knew it, the way it knew a lot of things she had never chosen to learn. She was in the corridor outside the east parlor when the front door came open and he walked in, her stepfather. The author of all of this, the man who had borrowed money with the ease of someone spending currency that belonged to someone else. Because it had always been her mother's name and her mother's credit and eventually her mother's daughter that backed his ambitions, and he came in with his hat and his coat and his wide, practiced smile. Amelia, my dear. She did not look well. She had slept 4 hours in 3 days and her eyes felt scraped and her hands would not stay still. Edmund, she said. I hear the meeting went smoothly. He moved past her toward the parlor. Unhurried, the way he moved through every space as though he had already calculated its value and found it acceptable. Blackwood seems reasonable enough for a man with that reputation. A bit cold. But cold men are manageable. They want what they want and they say so. More honest than the sentimental ones, really. What do you want? Amelia said. He turned. The smile didn't change. I beg your pardon? You said you had business nearby. What is the business? Something shifted behind the smile. Just slightly. The way a current shifted under still water, invisible on the surface, felt only if you knew to look. Can't a man visit his stepdaughter without an interrogation? You are not my father, Amelia said. No. His voice was pleasant. That was always the most unsettling thing about Edmund, the pleasantness of it. The way he could say awful things in the same tone another man might use to discuss the weather. I am the man who managed your mother's affairs for 2 years and kept your family name intact while doing it. I think a little gratitude might not be unreasonable. You accumulated those debts, she said. And you resolved them by selling me. Your mother made that decision. With your direction, Amelia. Something shifted in his register. Not louder. The way a room went flat before a storm. You are in a fine house with a wealthy husband and a future that is considerably better than your circumstances would have warranted otherwise. I would think carefully before deciding to be difficult. He took 1 step toward her. 1 step, that was all. But her body read it the way it had been trained to read it, and she went very still. The way prey went still, the way she had always gone still when the air in a room changed, and she needed to calculate how much space was between herself and the nearest door. That's enough. The voice came from the end of the corridor. Julian Blackwood. He walked toward them at an unhurried pace. The kind of pace that communicated he was not alarmed and not afraid, and had all the time in the world. Which somehow made it worse for the person it was directed at. He came to stand beside Amelia, not between her and Edmund. Not blocking her, not taking over, just present, in a way that shifted the entire geometry of the corridor. Mr. Voss, you weren't expected. No. I forgive the intrusion, Your Grace. The practiced smile came out immediately. Wider and more deferential, like a card produced from a sleeve. I had business nearby and thought I might. You may stay the night, Julian said. The weather makes travel inadvisable. He said it without looking away from Edmund. Tomorrow morning you will leave. Edmund blinked. There's no need for. You will also address my wife as Mrs. Blackwood, Julian said, as that is her name. A pause. Perfectly timed. And you will not speak to her in that tone again. In my house or anywhere else I am present silence. Edmund's smile held. His eyes ran through their calculations behind it. Quick and thorough as a man checking inventory. Of course. Your Grace, he said warmly. A long day's travel makes one careless with one's manners. My sincerest apologies. Mrs. Aldcroft will see you to a guest room, Julian said. He turned and walked back down the corridor. Did not look back at Edmund. Did not wait to see the expression that crossed the man's face when he thought no one was watching. Amelia watched it, though. and the thing she saw there behind the smile. Underneath the pleasantness, in the flat cold place where Edmund Voss kept the truth about himself, was not embarrassment. It was patience, the kind of patience that did not give up. The kind that simply waited and recalculated and waited some more. He will be back, she thought. This changes nothing for him. He is only adjusting. She followed Julian down the corridor and said nothing. She found him in the library an hour later. She had not meant to seek him out. She had meant to go to her room. Lock the door. She had already locked it twice just to feel it. Just to know it was real, and sit with her journal and breathe until her hands stopped their trembling. But she had passed the library and the door was open. And through it, she could see him standing at the window with a book in his hand that he was not reading. She stopped in the doorway. He looked over. "Come in or don't," he said. "There's no obligation either way." She came in. She stood near the bookcase, closest to the door. She was always nearest the door. She could not help it. It was a reflex she had stopped apologizing for, and she looked at the book spines rather than at him because they were easier. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked. The question had been living in her since Thursday. She had not expected to say it out loud. "To the contract," he said. Yes, he set the book down on the sill. He did not answer right away. Which she was already learning was how he operated. He let silence do the preliminary work. Gave his words time to settle before he placed them. "Your mother came to me 6 weeks ago," he said. "She wrote first? Then came herself. She was frightened, not of me particularly. Of what happened if I said no. A pause. I asked her to tell me about you. She said you were quiet, that you were clever with plants, that you had your father's sense of fairness." Amelia looked at him. "Then she told me about Edmund Voss," he said. "How much did she tell you?" "Enough." She understood what he meant by that. She felt it land in her chest with a particular weight. "I am not a charity case," she said. "No," he said. "You are not. I will not be grateful in the way you might expect." She kept her voice level. Steady. She was good at steady when it mattered. "I don't know how to be a wife to someone I've just met." I don't expect you to know that," he said. "Ed. I don't know how to be a husband to someone I've just met either. We are starting from the same place." She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't trust you," she said, because it was true. And she was done with true things going unspoken, he said. "You shouldn't, not yet." He picked up the book again. "Trust is something I have to earn. I understand that. And I'm not asking you for it." "What are you asking me for? Right now?" The faintest shift in his expression. Not quite a smile. Something more restrained and more genuine than a smile. "Nothing. Go get some sleep, Mrs. Blackwood. You look like someone who hasn't slept in 3 days. It's been 4, she said. Before she could stop herself, he looked at her. 4 days, he said. Yes. Something moved in his expression, something she did not have words for. "Go to sleep," he said quietly. "I'll deal with Edmund Voss." "That is not something you need to carry alone anymore." She stood in the doorway of his library for one more moment. Then she went back to her room. She locked the door. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the locked door did not feel like a cage she'd been put in. It felt like something she had chosen. Clara Bennett, the housekeeper, made her assessment of Amelia known without saying a single word about it directly. She set the breakfast tray down the next morning with a precision that communicated she had evaluated the situation and not yet decided what she thought of it. She briefed Amelia on the household schedule in a voice like a ledger factual. Inflectionless, a recitation rather than a conversation. "The kitchen garden is on the north side of the house," Clara said. "It has not been maintained in 3 years. You will find it in considerable disarray." "I don't mind disarray," Amelia said. Clara stopped, looked at her. "I find it easier to work with than something someone else has already decided the shape of," Amelia said. A pause, something in Clara's expression recalibrated not warmly, but precisely, the way a scale adjusted when the weight on it changed. "I will have the tools brought out," she said. "Thank you." Amelia picked up her tea. Mrs. Bennet, I know this is not the arrangement you would have chosen. It is not the one I would have chosen either. She kept her voice even. Direct, I am not going to ask you to pretend it is normal. I only ask that if I've done something wrong, you tell me plainly. I have had enough of people speaking around things. Clara looked at her for a long moment. That, she said finally, is a more straightforward request than I have received from anyone in this house in quite some time. Good, Amelia said. Then we understand each other. Clara left. Amelia finished her tea and went to find the garden. It was exactly as described, overgrown. Chaotic, full of things that had abandoned the shapes they'd been assigned and decided to become something else instead. Plants that had no business growing together had twined into each other anyway. Dead growth and live growth were so entangled it was hard at first to tell which was which. Amelia stood in it for a moment. Then she crouched down and started pulling. She found the lavender on the south-facing wall. Most of it was woody and overgrown. Leggy in the way lavender got when it was left too long without care. But the base of the stems was still green, still alive. It had not died, it had only been ignored. She sat back on her heels and looked at it. You'll come back, she said quietly. With some attention. You'll come back. You always talk to plants? She turned sharply. Julian Blackwood stood at the garden gate in working clothes. The kind that said he had been doing something practical before he ended up here. He was watching her with that steady attention she was already starting to recognize. You move quietly, she said. I've been told it unsettles people, he said. It doesn't unsettle me. She turned back to the lavender. Most things that unsettle other people don't bother me much, and the things that do bother you, he said, are things other people wouldn't notice at all. She looked at him. He said it without pity, without the clinical distance of someone describing a condition. He said it like a man stating a fact he had already absorbed and moved on from. Yes, she said. He came into the garden and moved to the far side, where a section of soil needed clearing, and he crouched down and started working without any further comment on the matter. They worked in silence. It was not an uncomfortable silence. Amelia had lived her whole life with silences that held things inside them pressure. Intent, the particular heaviness of something about to happen. This one was different. It was simply empty space. Usable. Hers to put whatever she needed in. Edmund will come back, she said. After a while. I know, Julian said. He doesn't abandon things he believes belong to him. She worked a root loose from the soil. He is patient. He knows how to wait and how to find the edges of things and press on them. So do I, Julian said. She looked up. He met her eyes. His were level and calm and completely certain. I am not telling you not to worry. I am telling you that you are not the one standing between yourself and him anymore. Amelia looked back at the lavender. At the green that was still alive underneath everything that had been allowed to die around it. All right, she said. All right, he said. And they went back to work. That night she dreamed of her father. He had been a quiet man, clear the way water was clear, transparent all the way down. He had believed that a person's word was the most valuable thing they owned, and that every time you spent it dishonestly, you spent it down. He had died when she was 12. Edmund Voss had come when she was 14. She woke to rain. She lay still in the dark and listened to it against the glass, and she thought about the lavender that was still alive under everything that had tried to kill it. She thought about the key in the lock. She thought about the man down the hall who had told a house full of servants not to raise their voices in her wing, who had stepped into a corridor between her and her stepfather without being asked to, who had told her she didn't need to beg anything, who had sat with her in a ruined garden and worked alongside her in silence and said, "You are not standing between yourself and him anymore." She thought about what it would mean to believe him. She thought about it carefully. The way she thought about plants, she did not yet know whether they were safe to touch, whether they would hold if she put weight on them, whether they were what they appeared to be. And for a moment, just one moment, Fragile and cautious and very small, she let herself believe it was possible. Not certain, not safe yet, but possible. That was more than she'd had in a very long. The morning after Edmund Voss left Blackwood Estate, Amelia found a note slipped under her door. Not from Julian. Not from Clara, from Edmund. It was written in his careful, pleasant hand, the same hand that had signed documents that destroyed her mother's credit. The same hand that had directed 2 years of quiet devastation, with the confidence of a man who believed consequences were things that happened to other people. My dear Amelia, it read, I hope you find your new situation agreeable. I confess I harbor some concern for your happiness, as any loving father would. I trust we will speak again soon. The world is smaller than people imagine, and family has a way of finding each other. Your devoted stepfather, Evie. She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in the pocket of her dress, because she had learned a long time ago that you did not throw away things Edmund Voss wrote to you. You kept them. You kept them. Someday you might need to show someone what he was. And people like Edmund Voss always counted on no one having kept the evidence. She went down to breakfast. Julian was already at the table when she came in, reading correspondence with the focused attention of a man who treated every piece of paper that came to him as something worth understanding fully before responding to. He looked up when she entered, set the letter down. You slept, he said. It was not a question. Some, she said. Better than 4 days without. She sat down across from him. Mrs. Aldcroft brought tea without being asked, set it near Amelia's right hand, and withdrew without a word. Amelia noticed that, the precision of it, the way the household had adjusted around her without anyone making a production of the adjustment. Edmund left a note, she said. Julian's eyes came up from the correspondence. She put it on the table between them, did not push it toward him, left it in the neutral space and let him decide what to do with it. He reached out and picked it up. Read it. His expression did not change, it almost never changed. She was beginning to understand, but there was a quality of stillness in it now that was different from the ordinary stillness. Sharper, the way water looked different when it was about to freeze. He wants you to know he is still present, Julian said. He wants me to know he is patient, Amelia said. There's a difference. Presence is just location. Patience is a strategy. Julian looked at her. You know him well, he said. I have had 6 years to study him, she said. I did not choose the education, but I received it thoroughly. Julian set the note down. He was quiet for a moment, that working silence, the kind where something was being turned over and examined. Then he said, Thomas Reed arrives today. Your lawyer?
Yes.
I want him to know about this note, about Voss and the debt, and the full structure of what your mother was made to agree to. He looked at her directly. I am not going to do anything about Edmund Voss without your knowledge and your agreement. I want to be clear about that. This is your situation first. I am only here because you allow it. Amelia looked at the note on the table. He forged documents, she said. It came out quietly. She had not planned to say it this morning. She had planned to say it carefully, at the right time, when she had arranged it properly in her mind. But it came out the way true things sometimes did, without asking permission. 2 years ago, my father's estate had a secondary property in Dorset. A small one. Edmund had papers drawn up that transferred the deed to a holding company he controlled. My mother did not know. I found the original deed in my father's correspondence box 3 months ago. The room was very still. I have it, she said. It's in my bag. The one I brought with me. Julian was quiet for a long moment. Amelia, he said. I know what it means, she said. I know it's evidence. I knew when I found it that I needed to get out of that house before Edmund found it first. Because if he had found it before I got out, she stopped. Pressed her hands flat on the table. I don't know exactly what he would have done. But I know it would not have been nothing. You've been carrying that for 3 months, Julian said. Yes. Alone, there was no one else to carry it with. He was looking at her with that expression again, the one she didn't have words for yet. The one that was not pity and not admiration, but something in between those things. Something that saw her clearly and did not look away from what it saw. "Thomas Reed is very good," Julian said, "and very discreet. Whatever you tell him goes no further without your permission." He paused. "Will you speak with him?" "Yes," she said. She picked up her tea. "I have been waiting," she said, "for a very long time. To speak to someone who could do something with what I know." Thomas Reed arrived at noon. He was nothing like what she had expected. She had expected someone like Edmund, polished, smooth, a man who wore competence like a costume. Thomas Reed was compact and direct, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and the manner of a man who found small talk genuinely inefficient. He shook her hand as though she were a colleague, not a client's wife. He sat down at the library table and opened his leather case and said, "Mrs. Blackwood, His Grace tells me you have documentation relating to a fraudulent property transfer. I'd like to hear everything if you're ready." She told him everything. It took 2 hours. She laid out 6 years of Edmund Voss, the debts, the pressures, the systematic dismantling of her mother's independent assets, the forged deed, the marriage contract that Edmund had orchestrated as the final act of an arrangement that had been designed from the beginning to extract every resource available from Catherine Whitaker's name and her daughter's future. Thomas Reed did not interrupt. He made notes. He asked precise questions at precise moments. The kind of questions that told her he was not learning information, he was building a structure, organizing what she gave him into something load-bearing. Julian sat slightly apart from them. He did not speak. He was there the way he was always there, present, without imposing. A solid fact at the edge of the room. Thomas Reed looked at his notes for a long moment. "The original deed," he said. "May I see it?" She retrieved it from her bag, the cloth bag, still in her room because she had not yet unpacked it fully. Because some part of her was still waiting to discover this was not real, and brought it down and put it in front of him. He examined it for a long time. Then he looked up. "This is significant," he said. "I know," she said. "Edmund Voss has done something very stupid," Thomas Reed said, with the calm satisfaction of a man who genuinely enjoyed finding the precise location where someone had made an irreparable error. He assumed no one would look for the original. The transfer was recorded with the secondary document. But the original was never destroyed because he didn't know it existed. "Your father kept it in personal correspondence rather than the estate files." "My father did not trust Edmund," Amelia said. "He died before Edmund came into our lives. But he always said that a secondary copy of any important document should be where a person would only look if they cared about the person, not the asset." Thomas Reed took off his spectacles, polished them, put them back on with the deliberate movements of a man resetting his thinking. "We cannot move immediately," he said. "If we move immediately, Edmund Voss will know the deed has surfaced, and he will have time to construct a defense. We need to build the surrounding case, first trace the holding company, identify the other parties, establish the pattern of fraud that this deed represents the culmination of." He looked at her. "That will take time, months, during which Mr. Voss cannot know what we have. He will come back here," Amelia said. "Yes," Thomas said. "He will, and when he does, you will need to behave as though you have nothing. As though this conversation never occurred." She had been doing that for 3 months. Sitting across from Edmund at dinner, passing the salt, listening to him speak about the weather and the state of the roads and the various improvements he was planning to make to the Wiltshire house, while she carried the deed in the lining of her travel bag and smiled and said very little. "I can do that," she said. Thomas Reed looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, with the brief decisiveness of a man updating an assessment. "Yes," he said, "I believe you can." The weeks that followed had a shape Amelia had not expected. She had expected the estate to feel like someone else's house, because it was. She had expected to feel like a visitor in it, careful, peripheral, aware at every moment that she was in a space that had existed long before her and would exist long after and had no particular investment in her presence. Instead, it felt like a place that was slowly becoming possible to breathe in. It happened in small ways. The knock before the door opened. Every time, without exception, every servant, every morning. Every delivery of a tray or a message. The way the household reorganized itself around her rhythms without anyone making a remark about it. Breakfast was available late because she often worked in the garden until mid-morning. The kitchen kept dried herbs on the work table now because she had mentioned once that she preferred to work with what she grew rather than what was bought. Clara had arranged it without being asked twice. She was not comfortable. She did not trust it yet, but the shape of it was becoming familiar. And familiar was a thing she had not had in a long time. The garden was the place she was most herself. She went there every morning, often before the rest of the house was fully awake. And she worked in the way she had always worked, methodically, attentively, in the kind of focused quiet that was different from the frightened quiet she carried in other parts of her life. In the garden, she did not need to track the position of every door. She did not need to monitor the distance between herself and the nearest exit. She could simply put her hands in the soil and let the rest of it wait. The lavender was coming back. Slowly, it was always slow, but the new growth at the base of the old wood was unmistakable. Green and silver-gray and alive, reaching toward whatever light it could find. She was working on a section of chamomile near the south wall when Julian appeared at the gate one morning. She had begun to recognize his particular step, unhurried, deliberate, the kind of tread that covered ground efficiently, without seeming to hurry. "You're here early," she said, without turning around. "I could say the same," he said. "I always rise early." She worked a root clear from the soil. "Old habit. When I was living at home, early mornings were the only time I could be certain." Edmund was still asleep. Julian was quiet. "You don't have to do that anymore," he said. "I know." She sat back on her heels and looked at the chamomile. "My body doesn't know that yet, though. The habit is faster than the knowledge. The knowledge says I'm safe. The body says check anyway." She heard him come into the garden. Heard him settle somewhere nearby. He always found a way to be present without crowding her. She had noticed that, the consistent and deliberate way he managed space around her. "Does it get better?" he asked. It was a genuine question. Not a reassurance dressed as a question. She recognized the difference. "My father's solicitor had a dog," she said after a moment. The dog had been badly treated before he was found. Even years later, even in a house where no one had ever hurt him, he would flinch at certain sounds, certain movements. She paused. But he also learned to sleep in the sunlight, to eat without watching the door. He learned both things at the same time, the old fear and the new safety. They just lived in him together. Julian was quiet for a long moment. "That seems like a fair answer," he said. "It is the honest one," she said. 3 weeks in, she heard the argument. She had not meant to hear it. She had been in the upstairs corridor, returning from the library with 2 books she had borrowed. And the sound of raised voices, not Julian's voice. He did not raise his voice. She had not once heard him raise. It came from the direction of his study. She stopped. The other voice was one she did not recognize. Male, agitated, educated, but with the particular edge of a man who was accustomed to getting his way and was finding that he wasn't. Cannot simply absorb the connection without consideration for what it implies. Blackwood, the woman has no standing. Her family's finances are a matter of public record. The association alone is enough to what? Julian's voice. The quietness that was its own kind of force. To affect your credibility in the matter of the Hargrove contract. The board is all ready. The board's concern about my marriage is not something I invited. And it is not something I intend to address, Julian said. If Hargrove's people require reassurance about my personal decisions, they are welcome to seek it from someone who offers it. I don't. We are done discussing this, Julian said. The contract stands. My wife is not a subject for boardroom deliberation. If you have concerns about the Hargrove terms themselves, bring them to read, otherwise we are done. A pause. Then the sound of a chair, footsteps. The study door opened down the corridor, and a man she had never seen broad, red-faced, his composure imperfectly reassembled, came out and walked toward the staircase without looking at her. She pressed herself against the wall to let him pass. He didn't acknowledge her. When he was gone, she stood there for a moment. Then she walked to the study door and knocked. "Come in," Julian said. She came in. He was standing at the window with his back to her, not defensively, just occupying the space, looking out at the grounds. "I heard some of it," she said. "I wasn't listening." "I was in the corridor, I know," he said. He turned. "Don't apologize for it. I'm not apologizing." She put the books down on the nearest chair. "I want to know if my being here is costing you something real." He looked at her directly. "It is costing me a business associate who was not worth the cost of keeping," he said. "That is not the same thing." "Jewel, my reputation can sustain a man's displeasure," he said. "It has sustained considerably more than that." A pause. "What I will not sustain is someone at my table treating you as a liability. So no, it has not cost me anything I valued." She held his gaze. "Why?" she said. "I mean it, and I am not asking you to justify yourself. I am genuinely asking, because men with everything to lose do not generally take on causes that could diminish what they have." "You are not a cause," he said. "Then what am I?" He was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that held something real inside it, rather than avoiding the question. "You are a person who deserved better than what she was given," he said. "And I was in a position to offer something better. That is all." It was not all. She could tell it was not all. But she also understood that he was not going to say more than that yet. And she understood why, because she was not ready to receive more than that yet. And somehow he knew that, without her having to tell him. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. She picked up her books and left. She was 3 steps down the corridor when she realized her hands were steady. Both of them. Just steady. Clara found her in the herb drying room on a Thursday afternoon, sorting through what she had harvested that week, and said without preamble, "Edmund Voss has written to 2 of the tenant families." Amelia's hands went still over the lavender. "Which ones?" she said. "The Martins and the Calder family. He wrote asking whether his stepdaughter had arrived safely, and whether she seemed his word was settled. He is building a network," Amelia said. "He wants informants. He wants to know what happens in this house." "The Martins brought the letter directly to me," Clara said. "The Calders brought theirs to His Grace." "What did Julian say?" "He thanked them. Said he would handle it." Clara paused. "Mrs. Blackwood, I want you to know something." Amelia looked at her. "When His Grace first told the staff about this marriage, I was not warm to the idea," Clarissa said. "It came out with the precision of someone who had chosen their words carefully and was now committed to them. I have worked in this house for 11 years. I have seen what it cost him. The last time he trusted someone who was not worth trusting. I was not prepared to welcome someone new without evidence." "That is fair," Amelia said. "I have evidence now," Clara said. "You carry that garden on your back every morning. You spoke to me plainly on the second day when every other woman of your background would have written me off as staff not worth direct address. You kept Edmund Voss's note." She paused. "You kept it because you knew it might matter. That is not the behavior of a woman who is merely surviving. That is the behavior of a woman who intends to win." Amelia looked at the lavender in her hands. "He hurt my mother for 6 years," she said. "And my mother let him because she did not believe there was anywhere to go that was better than what he was offering." She put the lavender down. "I am not going to let him do it again to either of us." Clara was quiet for a moment. "No," she said, "I don't believe you will." She turned and left. And Amelia stood alone in the drying room with the smell of lavender around her, and something new moving in her chest, something that was not yet courage. Exactly. Because courage was something you had to earn through action. but was the thing that came before courage, the decision to try. The first time Julian found her crouched beside the east corridor door at 2 in the morning. She did not hear him coming. She had woken from a dream, not a nightmare exactly. Just a dream where she had been walking through the Wiltshire house, and every door she opened led to another version of the same room. And Edmund was somewhere behind her, not catching up. Just present, just always exactly the same distance away, and she had gotten up and gone out into the corridor because the room had felt too small and the dark had felt too full. She had made it to the east corridor, and she had sat down against the wall beside the door that led outside the habit. Always the habit, always know where the exit is, and she had pulled her knees up and put her head down and told herself to breathe. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. She looked up. Julian stood in the corridor in his shirt sleeves, holding a candle, looking at her with an expression that was very careful and very awake. "I heard you in the corridor," he said. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to apologize." He sat down. She blinked. He sat down on the floor of the corridor, against the opposite wall, and set the candle between them, and stretched his legs out, and looked at her with the same equanimity he brought to everything. "You don't have to explain it," he said. "I know," she said. "And you don't have to go back to your room if you're not ready to." She looked at him sitting there, the Shadow Duke, the feared man of 3 counties, sitting on the floor of his own corridor, in his shirt sleeves, at 2 in the morning, because she had needed to be near an exit, and something cracked open in her chest. "Not breaking. I dreamed about Edmund," she said. "I know," he said. "He wasn't doing anything in the dream. He was just there, following at the same distance." She pulled her knees closer. "That's the worst kind, I think. The ones where nothing happens but you can't get away either." Julian was quiet. "I used to dream about my brother," he said. She looked at him. He almost never mentioned his brother. She knew the shape of the absence, the way people avoided the subject, the way the estate held certain rooms closed, but he had not spoken of it directly. "He died 4 years ago," Julian said. A pause. "He was not a good man in the end. He made choices that hurt people. People on this estate, people who trusted him, and I could not stop it in time." He looked at the candle flame. "I used to dream that I was standing in a room with him, watching him make the choice that I knew was wrong. And I could see what was coming, and I could not move fast enough to stop it." "Did the dream stop?" she asked. "No," he said, "but they changed, they got quieter. The urgency went out of them eventually." He looked at her. "That is not a promise. It is only what happened for me. It's enough," she said, knowing it changed. They sat in the corridor together in the candlelight, and the dark held them without pressing in, and after a while Amelia's breathing had slowed and steadied, and the dream had receded to the distance where it could be looked at rather than felt. "Go back to sleep," Julian said finally. "Yes," she said. She stood up. He walked her to her door, not inside, just to the door, and waited while she found her key and turned the lock. She looked at him over her shoulder. "Julian," she said. "Yes, thank you." He nodded once. Then he walked back down the corridor with his candle. And she went inside and locked the door, and she lay down in the dark and thought that there were some forms of kindness that were so consistent, so unhurried, so genuinely without expectation of return, that eventually they became the only evidence you trusted. Not words. Evidence. 4 weeks after Amelia's arrival at Blackwood Estate, Thomas Reed sent word that the holding company Edmund had used for the property transfer had been traced to 3 additional fraudulent transactions, 2 involving other families in the county, 1 involving a trust established in Amelia's grandmother's name that Edmund had dissolved without legal authority 2 years before anyone noticed it was gone. Julian brought the letter to Amelia in the garden. She read it standing up, with soil on her hands, and when she finished she read it again. "He's been doing this for longer than I knew," she said. "Yes," Julian said, "there are other people." She lowered the letter. "Other families he's done this to." She looked at the letter. Then at Julian. "I want to help them," she said. "Not just myself." When this goes forward, when Reed builds the case, I want the other families included. I want it to be everything, not just the piece that affects me." Julian looked at her for a moment. "That will make it more complicated," he said. "More time. More exposure to risk while the case is being built." "I know," she said. "I am not arguing against it," he said. "I am telling you the cost so you can decide knowing it fully." She met his eyes. "He hurt people I never knew," she said. "He took things from them that he had no right to. And he counted on them not having anyone in their corner who could fight back." She folded the letter. "I have someone in my corner now. That changes what is possible." Something moved in Julian's expression. Something deep and quiet that she was beginning to recognize as the way he looked, when something's been confirmed, something he had already hoped was true. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. She handed him back the letter and turned back to the garden and put her hands back in the soil and felt something settle in her chest like the last stone of a wall finding its place. She was not only surviving anymore, she was building. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, not from Edmund directly. That was the first thing that told Amelia something had shifted. Edmund Voss did not send letters through intermediaries when he wanted to threaten someone. He delivered his threats personally, pleasantly, with the warm smile of a man who believed he was doing you a favor by being honest about your situation. This letter came through a solicitor she had never heard of. A firm in London with an address on a street that sounded respectable. The language was careful and formal and said almost nothing directly, which was how she knew it said everything. It informed her that Edmund Voss, acting as a concerned family member, had become aware of certain irregularities in the marriage contract between Miss Amelia Whitaker and the Duke of Blackwood, and that he wished to ensure all parties were operating within the full protection of the law, and that he would be grateful for the opportunity to discuss the matter at a mutually convenient time. She read it at the breakfast table. Julian watched her read it. When she finished, she set it down, with the same careful steadiness she brought to everything that frightened her, that deliberate, practiced stillness that she wore like a second skin over the thing underneath that was never quite still. "He knows we're building something," she said. "Or he suspects it," Julian said. "There's a difference. Not for Edmund, there isn't." She looked up. "When Edmund suspects, he acts as though he knows. He doesn't wait for certainty. Certainty is for people who need to be right. Edmund only needs to be first." Julian picked up the letter. "Read it. Set it back down. He's trying to establish legal standing," he said. "If he can frame this as a family welfare concern, he can insert himself into proceedings, get access to records, slow things down. He wants to find out how much we have," Amelia said. "This letter is a probe. He's waiting to see how we respond, so he can calibrate how worried he needs to be." "Then we don't respond," Julian said. "He'll take silence as confirmation." "Good," Julian said. "Let him think we're afraid of what he might find. Afraid men make mistakes. Edmund Voss has never had to be careful around people he believed were frightened of him." She looked at him. "You want him overconfident," she said. "I want him exactly as overconfident as he has always been," Julian said. "That is what got him here. That is what will finish him." Amelia folded the letter. "I'll need to tell my mother," she said. It came out quieter than the rest. Julian was still. "She doesn't know about the deed," Amelia said. "She doesn't know about the holding company or the other families or any of it. She thinks Edmund is she has always known he was careless with money. She has told herself that careless is different from criminal." She looked at her hands. "Finding out the truth is going to cost her something she cannot get back." "Do you want me there when you tell her?" Julian said. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about most things without performing the consideration. Just actually doing it. "No," she said. "She needs to hear it from me first." "Just me. But I would like you nearby." "I'll be in the library," he said. She nodded. She sent for her mother that afternoon. Catherine Whitaker arrived at Blackwood Estate, looking the way she had looked for 6 years, carefully assembled. like a woman who had decided that if everything around her was falling apart, the least she could do was hold her own appearance together. Her dress was pressed. Her hair was neat. Her expression was the practiced pleasantness of someone who had learned to lead with pleasantness because it delayed the harder conversations. She embraced Amelia in the front hall, held on a moment longer than usual. "You look better," she said. "You have color." "I've been outside a great deal," Amelia said. "The garden?" "Yes." Her mother looked around the front hall with the cautious admiration of someone assessing a place they were not certain they were welcome in. "It is a fine house," she said. "His Grace seems you are all right." "Aren't you?" "He is not Edmund," Amelia said. Her mother flinched. "I'm sorry," Amelia said, and she meant it, because she had not meant to say it that way as an accusation, even though some part of her still carried the accusation somewhere underneath everything else. "Come and sit down, Mother. I need to tell you some things." She told her everything. It took a long time. Her mother did not speak while she listened. She sat very still across the parlor table, her hands folded in her lap, and she listened with the particular quality of someone receiving information they had been half prepared for, without knowing it, the way a person recognized a thing they had always feared but never let themselves name. When Amelia finished, her mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The property in Dorset, yes. I thought Edmund said the trust had been wound down by your father before he died." "He showed me paperwork. The paperwork was forged," Amelia said. Her mother closed her eyes. "Mother," Amelia said. "I knew something was wrong," her mother said. Her voice had lost its careful assembly. It was just her voice now, thin and tired and honest in a way it had not been in a long time. "I knew it, Amelia. From the beginning there were things that didn't. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself I was grieving your father, and that made me suspicious of anyone who she stopped." Opened her eyes. "I told myself a great many things." "I know," Amelia said. "I sold you," her mother said. It came out like something that had been pressing against a door for a long time and had finally broken through. "I sat in that drawing room and I signed a piece of paper that put you in a stranger's house. And I told myself it was the only option, but the truth is I was afraid of him, and I have been afraid of him for 6 years, and I did not." "Mother." Amelia reached across and put her hand over her mother's. "Listen to me. We are going to fix this, not just for us. For the other families, too. Thomas Reed has what he needs. Julian has the resources to see it through. Edmund is going to answer for every piece of this. He will find a way out," her mother said. "He always does. He is very good at it. He has never faced someone who had everything he stole and the means to prove it," Amelia said. "He has always operated on the assumption that his victims didn't have anyone. That was his only real advantage. It is gone now." Her mother looked at her. "When did you become so certain?" she said. Not critically. With something that was very close to wonder. "I don't know exactly," Amelia said. "I think it happened slowly, while I was doing other things." Her mother stayed 3 days. On the second evening, Julian joined them for dinner, and Amelia watched her mother recalibrate her understanding of him across the course of 2 hours, with the focused attention of a woman who had learned, late and painfully, to look more carefully at what was actually in front of her rather than what she had been told to see. Julian did not perform for her mother's benefit. He was exactly what he was: direct, attentive, unhurried. He asked Catherine about her own garden in Wiltshire, which she had loved and let fall into neglect over the past 2 years. And he listened to her answer with genuine interest. And when she mentioned that she had once grown a particular variety of climbing rose that had been her own mother's, he said, without any particular emphasis, that the east wall of Blackwood's walled garden had the right aspect for it, if she ever wanted to start again. Her mother was quiet for a moment after that. Then she said, "You are not what I expected, Your Grace." "No," Julian said. "I find I rarely am. Edmund told me you were..." She stopped. "Edmund told me a great many things. I imagine he did," Julian said. "A man who needs people to believe his version of events tends to invest heavily in the telling of it." Her mother looked at her plate. Then she looked up. "Thank you," she said, "for what you have done for my daughter. I am aware that I gave you very little reason to do it." "You gave me every reason," Julian said. "You told me who she was." Her mother said nothing else on the subject. But that night, when she embraced Amelia goodnight in the corridor outside her room, she held on longer than she had in the front hall. And when she stepped back, her eyes were wet, and she did not apologize for it. "I am going to fix what I can fix," she said. "I know," Amelia said. "I am going to be better than I was. I know that too," Amelia said. Edmund arrived on a Wednesday morning, 9 days after the letter from his London solicitor. He did not send word ahead this time. Amelia was in the garden when she heard the carriage. She knew it immediately, not because she recognized the specific sound of it, but because her body recognized what his arrivals felt like. That particular drop in the center of her chest, that sharpening of every sense at once. The way her hands went still over the lavender, and the air seemed to change pressure. She stood up. She did not go inside. She stayed where she was, standing in the garden, and she let him come to her. He came through the side gate. He had found it himself, which meant he had already been given a tour of the grounds, or had already studied the layout of the estate, which meant he had been planning this visit longer than 9 days. He walked toward her with his hat in his hand and his pleasant smile in place. "Like a man dropping in on a neighbor, Amelia," he said. "You look well. Truly, the country air agrees with you, Edmund," she said. "I hoped we might talk," he said, "just the two of us, before the lawyers get involved in everything. You know how lawyers make things complicated." He smiled. "They're not built for family matters. This stopped being a family matter when you forged my father's signature on a property deed," she said. The smile held, but his eyes went very still behind it. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "It is a serious crime," she said. "Amelia," his voice shifted to the lower register. "The flatter one. You have found something you think is significant. I understand that, and I understand that you are angry. You have a right to be angry. Things have been difficult, and I take some responsibility for that. But you are about to do something that will damage a great many people, including your mother, including yourself, based on a document you don't fully understand." "I understand it entirely," she said. "You are 22 years old," he said. It came out pleasantly, which was the most frightening way he could have said it. "You have been living in this house for 6 weeks. You are dependent on a man who barely knows you, who married you out of some misguided sense of—" "Stop," she said. He stopped. She had never said that to him before. In 6 years, she had never once said stop to Edmund Voss and had it mean anything. Her voice had come out clear and even and completely without tremor. And it surprised her almost as much as it appeared to surprise him. "You came here because you're afraid," she said. "That letter from your solicitor was a test. And we didn't respond the way you expected, and now you're here trying to read what that means. And you are standing in this garden trying to make me feel small enough to doubt what I know. Because that has always worked before." She kept her eyes on his. "It won't work anymore." Edmund looked at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face. The pleasant did not disappear. It was too practiced, too ingrained, but something underneath it rearranged itself into something colder and more honest. "You think Blackwood is going to protect you," he said. "I think the law is going to hold you accountable," she said. "Julian is simply the reason I have access to it." "The law," Edmund said. And now there was something almost contemptuous in the pleasantness. "Is operated by men who know each other and owe each other things. I have operated in that world for 20 years, Amelia. Your husband has a good reputation. I have better connections. You have connections who don't yet know what you've done," she said. "That changes." He took a step toward her, just one step. The same step he had taken in the corridor the night he arrived. The deliberate encroachment, the reduction of distance, that was not about proximity but about power. And her body responded. She felt it the old The instinct that had been trained into her over 6 years of learning that when Edmund moved toward you, it meant something bad was coming. Her breath shortened, her shoulders came up, but her feet did not move. She stood there, and she let the fear run through her, and she did not move her feet. "I was afraid of your shadow for 6 years," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady, but it was present. It was hers. "I spent 6 years making myself small enough that you wouldn't notice me. I learned your moods and your schedules, and the particular way your voice changed when you were about to do something I needed to protect myself from." She breathed. "I know you, Edmund. I know exactly what you are, and today I am finally standing somewhere that lets me say so." He stared at her. "You are overestimating your position," he said. "And you," said Julian Blackwood from the garden gate, "are trespassing." Turned. Julian came through the gate with the same unhurried pace he brought to everything. And behind him Amelia registered this with a clarity that felt almost slow. Like watching something inevitable finally arrive was Thomas Reed. And beside Thomas was a man she had never seen, a broad, official-looking man with a leather case, who had the manner of someone accustomed to delivering news that people did not want to receive. Edmund's eyes went to the official-looking man, stayed there. "Julian Blackwood," Edmund said, and his voice had recovered most of its pleasantness. "Though not all of it. I came to speak with my stepdaughter about a family matter." "There's no need for Voss," Thomas Reed said, stepping forward with the brisk efficiency of a man who had been waiting for this specific moment for several months. "My name is Thomas Reed. I represent His Grace the Duke of Blackwood and Mrs. Amelia Blackwood. I need to inform you that a formal complaint has been filed with the Court of Chancery regarding the fraudulent transfer of the Dorset property, the dissolution of the Whitaker family trust, and 2 additional transactions that your associates at Harrington Holdings conducted on your behalf between 1812 and 1814. The color did not leave Edmund's face. That was the thing about Edmund, he did not give you the satisfaction of watching him crumble. His face stayed composed with the discipline of a man who had been preparing for bad news in some form for a long time. But his hands, Amelia noticed, his hands which he held very still at his sides. They were not still. "This is premature," Edmund said. "Whatever documents you believe you have, we have the original deed," Thomas said. "Signed and witnessed in 1808, predating your transfer by 4 years. We have correspondence between yourself and the agent at Harrington Holdings. We have testimony from 2 witnesses to the dissolution of the Whitaker Trust who were not aware at the time that the authority you presented was fabricated." He paused. "We also have 3 letters you wrote to tenant families on this estate, soliciting information about this household, which your own solicitor will tell you constitutes an actionable attempt to interfere in legal proceedings once those proceedings are formally opened." "Which they now are." Edmund was quiet. It was a different quality of quiet from anything Amelia had seen from him before. Not the calculating quiet, not the patient quiet that was really just waiting. This was the quiet of a man who was running the numbers and finding that they did not come out in his favor no matter how he arranged them. "You will receive formal notice through your solicitor within the week," Thomas said. "Until that time I must ask you to leave this property and to make no further contact with Mrs. Blackwood or her mother." Edmund looked at Amelia. Not at Julian, not at Thomas, at her, and in his face underneath everything. Underneath the composure and the pleasantness and all the years of careful management of his own surface she saw it. The thing she had always known was there and had never been in a position to name out loud. Fear, not the fear of consequences exactly, something more fundamental than that. The fear of a man who had built his entire life on the assumption that people without power stayed without power, and who was looking at the first evidence that this assumption had a limit. "You were always more like your father than I gave it for," he said. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. "Yes," she said. Edmund Voss put his hat back on. He straightened his coat, He walked to the garden gate with the careful dignity of a man who was not going to give anyone the satisfaction of watching him rush. He went through the gate. His footsteps crossed the gravel. The carriage door opened and closed, the sound of wheels on the drive. And then quiet. Amelia stood in the garden with her hands at her sides and the smell of lavender around her and the weight of 6 years lifting off her spine vertebra by vertebra. Slow and enormous and almost painful in its relief. Thomas Reed said something to Julian. Julian responded. They spoke for a few minutes in low voices, the practical language of what comes next. The procedure and the timeline and the legal architecture of what was being built. She heard it without absorbing it. What she was absorbing was this. She had stood still. She had let the fear run through her, and she had stood still, and she had said the truth out loud. The man who had spent 6 years, making her believe she had no right to say it. Her feet had not moved. Julian came to stand beside her. He did not say anything. He simply stood there, present in the way he was always present, not filling the space, just inhabiting it, steady and certain and available if she needed something to hold on to. He'll fight it, she said. Yes, Julian said, he has connections. He has resource. Gonna be fast. No, Julian said. It won't be fast. I don't care, she said. And she was surprised to find she meant it entirely. I have waited 6 years. I can wait longer if the ending is the right one. It will be, Julian said. She turned and looked at him. She had trusted those 2 words from very few people in her life. Her father, a tutor who had come and gone, the first moments of instinct about Clara, before the evidence had accumulated. She was careful with trust in the way you were careful with something that had been broken often enough that you knew exactly which angles it failed at. She looked at him, and she thought about the bell pull. The floor of the corridor at 2 a.m, the garden. The business associate who had walked out and been allowed to walk. The way he had stood beside her just now, not in front. Not between, just beside, no, she said, and she meant that too. The twist came 3 days later. And it did not come from Edmund, it came from her mother. Catherine Whitaker arrived at Blackwood Estate without sending word ahead, the second person in a week to do so, which told Amelia that something had broken through Finn's considerable investment in proper form. She came into the front hall with her coat still on, and her expression carrying something Amelia had not seen on her mother's face in years. Fury, clean, clear, undiluted fury. He went to the house, Catherine said. Amelia went still. Last night he came to the house in Wiltshire. He said he came to collect some of his personal correspondence. But he went into your father's study, Amelia, and he went through the correspondence box. She put a letter on the hall table. He didn't find anything. I had already moved everything. After what you told me. But I found this when I went through the study this morning. Amelia picked up the letter. It was not Edmund's handwriting. It was a hand she did not recognize, hurried. Slightly careless, the writing of someone who had composed in urgency. The letter was addressed to Edmund, and it was unsigned. But its contents were enough. It described a meeting. A meeting between Edmund Voss and 2 members of the board of a financial institution that Thomas Reed had already identified as connected to the Harrington Holdings case. The meeting had happened 4 days ago, 2 days before Thomas Reed had served notice of the Chancery complaint. Which meant someone had told Edmund the complaint was coming before it was formally filed. Someone inside the legal process had warned him. Amelia read the letter twice. Then she walked to the library and knocked. Julian opened the door. He looked at her face and knew immediately that something had changed. She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it. His expression did not shift dramatically, but she had learned to read the smaller changes, the particular quality of stillness that meant he was recalculating. That the landscape had changed, and he was adjusting to the new shape of it. Someone told him, she said, before Reed filed. Someone with access to Reed's preparations told Edmund the complaint was coming. Yes, Julian said. Who has that access? A small number of people, Julian said. Reed himself, his clerks, the witnesses he has been preparing. He set the letter down. And one other person who asked to be kept informed of the timeline. He said it with the particular care of placing a piece of information that they know is going to hurt. Amelia looked at him. Who? She said. Julian was quiet for one moment. The man who came to my study 6 weeks ago, he said. The associate who objected to our marriage. He has been a source of legal referrals for Reed's firm for 3 years. He had enough of a relationship with one of the clerks to ask questions that would not seem suspicious. Amelia thought about the man she had seen leaving Julian's study. Broad, red-faced, the careful reassembly of composure. He wasn't objecting to the marriage because of his business interests, she said slowly. No, Julian said. I don't believe he was. He was already working with Edmund, she said. Or became useful to Edmund once he understood what Edmund needed, Julian said. It amounts to the same thing. The room was very quiet. Amelia looked at the letter in Julian's hand. Edmund knew, she said. He knew about the complaint before it was filed, so when Reed served him notice, he already had 4 days head start on his response. She thought through it. That's why he came to the estate when he did. He wasn't reacting to the letter from Reed. He was already ahead of it. He came here to assess how much we had before he decided how to respond to what was coming. Yes, Julian said. That is what I believe. So when I stood in that garden and told him we had the deed and the correspondence and the witnesses, he already knew about some of it, Julian said. You confirmed the rest. She sat down. She stood in the garden and she had felt certain. She had felt the ground solid under her feet. She had believed that Edmund's fear was the fear of a man who had finally run out of road. And he had known. He had stood there and listened to her, and smiled his measured smile, and he had known things she had not known he knew. How much does this change, she said. Julian sat down across from her. It changes the timeline, he said. He has a head start we didn't plan for. He will have already begun moving assets, preparing alternative narratives, possibly approaching the other witnesses. Can we still win? Julian looked at her directly. Yes, he said. But I need to ask you something first. Ask Edmund came here to find out what we had, he said. He has now gone back with more information than we intended to give him. He knows about the deed. He knows we have witnesses. He knows the scope of what Reed is building. A pause. He also knows that you are not afraid of him anymore. And that Amelia, that is the thing he did not expect. That is the variable he cannot plan around, because he has never encountered it from you before. He leaned forward slightly. He is going to come at you differently now, not at the case. At you. He will try to find the thing that makes you doubt yourself again. He will try to give you back the fear. She held his gaze. Let him try, she said. Julian looked at her for a long moment. Then for the first time, in all the weeks she had known him, in all the careful and unhurried and steady time of this, he smiled. A real one, not the restrained shift of expression she had seen before. A full, genuine smile that changed the entire landscape of his face and made him look, just briefly, like a man who was not carrying everything he usually carried. All right, he said. Then here is what we do next. And Amelia Blackwood leaned forward and listened. And the fear was still there, underneath everything. The way it always was, but it was no longer driving. It was no longer in the front of the carriage with its hands on the reins. She was. The plan Julian laid out that evening was not complicated. That was the first thing that surprised her about it. She had expected something elaborate, a legal counter-maneuver. A series of strategic moves that required a particular kind of mind to follow. Instead, it was almost simple. They would give Edmund exactly what he expected. Silence, no counterfiling, no public statement, no visible acceleration of Reed's preparations. Edmund had a 4-day head start, and he believed he had used it well. He believed he had assessed the full scope of what they had and found the weak points in it. He believed, most critically, that the leak from Reed's clerk had given him an advantage that Amelia and Julian did not know he possessed. They would let him believe all of that, while Thomas Reed quietly rebuilt the case around the leak, sealing it. rerouting the sensitive communications, and using the clerk's compromised position as a way to feed Edmund selective information about their timeline that was designed to make him move too fast in the wrong direction. "He wants us rattled," Julian said that night, "so we give him a rattled-looking silence. We let him interpret it as fear, and while he interprets," Amelia said. "Reed builds," Julian said, "faster than Edmund thinks possible. Because Edmund now believes we're regrouping rather than advancing." She thought about it. "He'll make a mistake," she said. "He's already making one," Julian said. "He thinks the leak gave him certainty. But certainty makes a man like Edmund careless. He stops looking for what he might have missed." "What did he miss?" she said. Julian looked at her steadily. "Your mother," he said. "He went to that house to find documents. He didn't find any. So he concluded your mother had nothing. What he didn't consider is that your mother is now willing to testify." Amelia was very still. "She would have to describe everything," she said. 6 years of it. In front of people she doesn't know. In a formal proceeding, with Edmund sitting across from her. "Yes," Julian said. "She has not stopped. Started again. She is trying. She is genuinely trying. But she has spent 6 years accommodating him. That kind of accommodation gets into your bones. It is not as simple as deciding to stop, I know," Julian said. "That is why I am telling you not Reed. Because this decision belongs to her. And the conversation needs to come from you, and it needs to happen before Reed moves to the next stage." He paused. "Can you talk to her?" Amelia said. She did not sleep much that night. She went to Wiltshire the next morning. Alone, Julian had offered to send someone with her. She had said no. This was the kind of conversation that needed to happen without witnesses. Without the implicit pressure of another person's presence. Without anything in the room except 2 women who had the same history and had survived it differently. Her mother was in the drawing room when she arrived. The one with the water stain on the ceiling. Catherine had not had it repaired. Amelia noticed. Some things apparently stayed. "You look like you didn't sleep," her mother said. "I didn't much," Amelia said. She sat down. "I need to ask you something difficult." Her mother folded her hands in her lap. "All right. Thomas Reed needs a witness who can testify to the pattern of Edmund's behavior over the full 6 years," Amelia said. "Someone who was present for the financial decisions, the document signings, the way he managed information and access within the household. Someone who can describe what 6 years of this actually looked like from the inside." She paused. "There is no one who fits that description except you." Her mother was quiet. "He will be there," Catherine said. "Yes. He will have a lawyer who will ask me questions designed to make me look like a woman who participated willingly in what he did. Who benefited from it and is now attempting to rewrite her own history." "Yes," Amelia said. "That is exactly what his lawyer will do." Her mother looked at the water stain. "I did benefit from it," she said. "In the beginning. Before I understood fully what he was doing. The debts were paid. The house was maintained. I told myself the arrangement was working." She paused. "His lawyer will not be wrong about that part." "No," Amelia said. "He won't. But Thomas Reed will ask you different questions. He'll ask you about the moment you realized the arrangement had a cost you hadn't agreed to. He'll ask you about the things you saw that you couldn't explain at the time. He'll ask you about the Dorset property and what Edmund told you about it. And when." She leaned forward. "Mother, the truth of what happened to you is not the same as guilt for what he did. You can tell the truth of what happened to you without taking responsibility for what he chose to do." Her mother was quiet for a very long time. Outside, a carriage passed on the road. "I was so afraid of being alone," her mother said finally. "After your father died, I was so afraid of what it would mean financially. Socially, just the dailiness of it, being the only one responsible for everything." She looked at Amelia. "I made you responsible for things you should never have had to carry. Long before Edmund, even before him, I leaned on you in ways that were not fair." "Mother, let me finish." Her mother's voice was steady in a way it had not been in their previous conversation. Something had settled in her since then. Something that looked cautiously like resolution. I want to testify. I have wanted to do something that was genuinely useful since you told me the truth about the deed. I want to stand in that room and say what I saw. She paused. I am afraid. I will probably be afraid the entire time. But I am choosing to do it anyway. Amelia looked at her mother. You sound like someone I know, she said. Her mother almost smiled. You sound like your father, she said. You always did. I forgot to tell you that enough. Amelia reached across and took her mother's hand. They sat like that for a moment, not talking, just present together in the room where so much of this had started, in the house that Edmund Voss had slowly emptied of everything that mattered. We're going to get it back, Amelia said. Not the house, necessarily, but the resto, her mother said. She sounded like she meant it. 3 weeks after that conversation, Edmund Voss made his first real mistake. It came in the form of a letter to the 2 witnesses Reed had been preparing the men who had been present at the dissolution of the Whitaker Trust. The letter did not come from Edmund directly. It came through an intermediary. And its language was careful, and on the surface it read as a simple business communication regarding an unrelated matter. But one of the witnesses, a retired solicitor named Hadley, who had spent 40 years learning to read the undertext of written communications, brought the letter directly to Thomas Reed and said, "This is an attempt to suggest to me, without saying so plainly, that my continued involvement in this matter would be professionally inadvisable." Thomas Reed read the letter. Then he read it again. Then he sent word to Julian. He moved. He's trying to collapse the witness testimony. He thinks we're weaker than we are. We need to accelerate. Julian brought the message to Amelia in the garden, where she was harvesting the first real yield of lavender the kitchen garden had produced. In 3 years, not a large yield, but real, tangible evidence that things left for dead could come back with the right attention. She read the message, set it down on the garden wall. He's panicking, she said. He's controlled panicking, Julian said. There's a difference. He's not flailing, he's making calculated moves. But he's making them faster than he intended to, because he's been reading our silence as weakness. And weakness with a case like this looks like imminent collapse to a man like him. He thinks he needs to bring down the witnesses before we get them into a formal proceeding. Can he? She said. Not both of them, Julian said. Hadley is solid. The second witness, a man named Crane, is less certain. He is not dishonest, but he is afraid of professional consequences. And Edmund is very good at making professional consequences feel real. What does Reed need? Time and one more piece, Julian said. There is a bank record, a transfer authorization that Edmund signed personally rather than routing through the holding company. Reed has been trying to get access to it for 6 weeks. The bank has been slow. Why? Julian paused. Because one of the bank's senior partners has a social relationship with Edmund, he said. Nothing provable, just slowness. The kind of institutional friction that happens when someone with influence wants something delayed. Amelia looked at him. What would make the bank move faster, she said. A formal court order, Julian said. Which Reed can get. But the application for the order will become a matter of public record. Which means Edmund will know we're moving for it. Which means he will know his leak has been cut off and that we are further along than he believed. So we lose the element of surprise. Yes. She thought about it. She looked at the lavender in her hands, rubbed a stem between her fingers and felt the oil release. Clean and certain, and exactly what it had always been. Get the order, she said. Julian looked at her. Are you certain, he said. Edmund has been operating in the shadows this whole time, she said. He works best when no one is quite sure what he has or what he knows. The moment this becomes public, the moment people understand the scope of what he's done, he loses the social cover that has protected him. His connections start calculating whether standing beside him is worth the association. She paused. Get the order. Make it public. Let the people who have been looking the other way see exactly what they've been looking away from. Julian was quiet for a moment. That is a different strategy than the one we planned, he said. The strategy we planned was built around Edmund having less information than he had, she said. He adjusted. So do we. He looked at her with that expression, the deep, quiet, certain one. All right, he said. All right, she said. The court order was filed on a Thursday. By Friday morning, it was the subject of conversation in every drawing room and professional office that had any connection to either Julian Blackwood's business interests or Edmund Voss's social circle. Thomas Reed had not publicized it, he had not needed to. The filing itself was public record, and the names attached to it and the institution named in it were enough to animate the particular machinery of rumor that operated in these circles with the efficiency of a well-maintained engine. By Saturday, 2 of Edmund's business associates had sent word through their own solicitors that they were reviewing their positions. By Sunday, the Crane witness, the uncertain one, the one Edmund had been working to intimidate, sent Thomas Reed a letter saying he was prepared to give full testimony. Amelia learned about it from Clara, who had heard it from Mrs. Aldcroft, who had received a brief note from Thomas Reed. And the chain of information through the household was so immediate and so unself-conscious that Amelia stood in the corridor reading it and felt, with a peculiar vividness, that she was in a place where people actually told her things. She had lived 6 years in a house where information was managed, where what she was allowed to know was determined by someone else's calculation of what would keep her compliant, where she had learned to piece together the truth from fragments, because the direct route was never available. This was different. She folded the note and went to find Julian. He was in the library, reading actual correspondence this time, not holding a book and not reading it. He looked up when she came in. Crane is testifying, she said. I heard, he said. Reed sent word an hour ago. Edmund is going to know the case is complete, she said. He'll know there's nothing left to collapse. Yes, what does he do next, she said. When a man like Edmund has no more moves, Julian set down his correspondence. He has one move left, he said. He comes to you directly. Not with the solicitor, and not with subtlety. He comes with whatever he has left, which at this point is mostly the hope that he can make you doubt whether finishing this is worth what it costs you. He's going to try to appeal to me, she said. He's going to try to make you feel responsible for what happens to him, Julian said. That is his last available leverage. The law, the evidence, the witnesses, those are beyond his control now. But if he can make you believe that proceeding will damage your mother, or your own reputation, or something you care about, he will try that. He already tried that, she said. In the garden work. He'll try harder, Julian said. With more specific details. He's had time to identify what matters to you. She thought about what mattered to her. The garden, her mother, the deed in her father's name. The other families who had lost things they couldn't recover. The women who came to the estate's outer gate every few weeks now quietly, hesitantly, having heard something from someone about a woman at Blackwood who knew something about plants and did not charge for the knowing, and sat with her in the garden and told her things they hadn't told anyone. That had started 3 weeks ago. Clara had brought the first one, a tenant's wife, whose husband had been by a landlord she suspected was connected to Harrington Holdings. Amelia had listened and written down what she heard and passed it to Thomas Reed. And then she had given the woman a cutting of lavender because the woman had admired it. And the woman had held it the way Amelia had held things, sometimes carefully, as if it was the one solid thing in a day that had been otherwise made of water. Since then 4 more had come. She had not talked to Julian about it yet. She had not been sure how to describe what it was, whether it was something or nothing, whether it was the beginning of something, or just a series of coincidences. Edmund cannot touch what matters to me, she said. Because what matters to me now is not the same as what was vulnerable 6 years ago. He learned what I was afraid of when I was 16. He never updated the information. Julian looked at her steadily. You're not afraid the same way anymore, he said. I'm still afraid, she said. I don't think that entirely goes away. But I'm afraid of different things now. I'm afraid of not finishing this. I'm afraid of the other families not getting what they're owed. I'm afraid of Edmund walking away because someone gave him a door to walk through. She paused. Those fears have direction. They point forward instead of backward. Julian was very quiet. Then he said, "There is something I need to tell you." Something in his tone shifted. Not alarming, she had learned to read his tones with a precision that would have surprised her 6 weeks ago, but serious. The kind of serious that preceded information rather than crisis. "The man who warned Edmund," Julian said. "My former associate. His name is Harlan Voss." She stared at him. "Voss," she said. "Edmund's cousin," Julian said. "I did not know the connection when he became a source of referrals for Reed's firm." Reed did not know it. The surname is common enough that no one connected it. A pause. "He connected himself to my professional circle 4 years ago. Before I had any connection to you or your family. I believe Edmund placed him there. I believe Edmund has been preparing for the possibility of legal exposure for longer than any of us understood. And that positioning a family member in proximity to the legal resources I was most likely to use was part of that preparation." The room was very quiet. "He planned for you specifically," Amelia said. "For someone like me," Julian said. "Someone with the resources to challenge him. He identified me as a potential threat years before I had any reason to be one." A pause. "Which means the leak was not opportunistic, it was designed. Edmund has been preparing a counter-strategy since before this situation began." Amelia absorbed this. She thought about Edmund in the garden. The way he had stood there with his pleasant smile and his careful voice and his hands that had not been entirely still. She had read the hands as fear, but what if they had been something else? What if they had been the particular agitation of a man running through contingencies he had already prepared? "He knew about the complaint before we filed it," she said slowly. "But he came to the estate anyway. He stood in the garden and let me tell him what we had. He could have stayed away, stayed quiet, bought more time, but he came." She looked at Julian. "Why would he come if he already knew?" Julian said nothing. He was watching her think. "He came because he wanted to see me," she said. "He wanted to assess me, not the case me. He needed to know if I was really different from the girl he knew, or whether I was borrowing courage that would run out." "Yes," Julian said quietly. "And what did he see?" "I believe," Julian said, "he saw something that concerned him considerably more than the legal case." She held his gaze. "Good," she said. "Edmund came on a Wednesday." "Not to the estate. He was no longer welcome at the estate. Thomas Reed had made that formal and legal, and so he came to the village. To the inn at the edge of the market square, and he sent a message asking Amelia to meet him there." She showed Julian the message. Julian had looked at her. "You don't have to go," he said. "I know," she said. "Reed would advise against it." "I know that too," she said. "I'm going anyway, then I'm coming," he said. "You can come to the inn," she said. "But I need to speak to him alone first. You'll know when I need you." Julian looked at her for a long moment. "How will I know?" he said. "Because I'll ask," she said. "For the first time in my life, I am asking for things when I need them. I am not going to stop now." He nodded once. They went to the village together. And Julian waited in the front room of the inn with a coffee he did not drink. And Amelia went through to the private sitting room where Edmund Voss was waiting. He looked older than he had in the garden. Not dramatically, it had been 3 weeks. Not 3 years, but there was something worn at his edges that she had not seen before. The pleasantness was still there, but it was working harder. "You could see the effort in it now." "Amelia," he said. "Thank you for coming. Say what you came to say," she said. She sat down across from him without taking off her coat. "I don't intend to be here long." Something shifted in his expression. He had expected something different from her, she could tell. Perhaps more hesitation. Perhaps the residue of the girl who had always been half apology in a room with him. "I want to make you an offer," he said. "No," she said. He blinked. "You haven't heard it," he said. "It doesn't matter," she said. "There is no version of an offer from you that I'm interested in." Whatever you're about to propose involves me receiving something in exchange for making this easier for you. And I'm not interested in making this easier for you. Amelia Edmund, she kept her voice even. I know about Harlan Voss. I know he was placed in Julian's professional circle 4 years ago. I know you have been preparing for this possibility since before it was a possibility. Because you have always known what you were doing was criminal, and you have always planned for the moment someone with resources decided to look at it closely. She paused. What I want you to understand is that none of that preparation is going to be enough. Not because of Julian's resources, and not because of Thomas Reed's skill, but because you made one mistake that you cannot plan around. He was very still. You underestimated how long someone could wait, she said. You have always counted on your victims running out of endurance before you ran out of strategy. You counted on exhaustion, on people deciding it was easier to absorb the loss than to fight for the recovery. She looked at him directly. I am not exhausted. I have been in that estate for 6 weeks, and I have slept in a room with a key and eaten at a table where people ask what I need. And I am more rested than I have been in 6 years. I can do this for as long as it takes. Edmund looked at her. For a long moment, something moved in his face that she could not entirely name. Not fear this time. Something more complicated. Something that might, in a different man, have been recognition. Your father, he said, would have been very proud of you. She stood up. Yes, she said, he would have. She walked to the door. Amelia. His voice came after her, and for the first time in all the years she had known him, it did not have the pleasantness in it. It was just his voice. Tired and without performance. I need you to know that I did not your mother. I genuinely, she said. She did not turn around. Whatever you felt for my mother, it was not enough to make you treat her honestly. Feelings without honesty are just feelings. They don't owe anyone anything. She put her hand on the door. Goodbye, Edmund. She walked out into the front room. Julian looked up from his coffee. She crossed to him and sat down in the chair beside his. And she put her elbows on the table and she breathed. Because she was allowed to let it be hard, she had learned that it was allowed to be hard, and she was still capable, and those two things could both be true at the same time. Did he try to make an offer? Julian said. He didn't get the chance, she said. Julian looked at her. Are you all right, he said. Yes, she said. And then because it was true and because she had promised herself she would not leave true things unspoken. I'm angry. I think I am going to be angry for a long time. Not the frightened kind of angry, the kind you carry quietly so no one feels it. Just real anger. Because he took things that were not his to take and he was never going to stop until someone stopped him. That is, Julian said. The most reasonable thing I have heard anyone say in weeks. She almost laughed. Come on, she said. Take me home. She said it without thinking. The word home arrived, without her planning it, without the self-consciousness she might have brought to it 6 weeks ago. The awareness of using a word that might not quite fit the situation yet. But Julian did not make anything of it. He stood up, left coins on the table for the untouched coffee, held the door, and they walked out into the afternoon together, and the word had fit perfectly. She had known it even before she said it. The knowledge had just taken 6 weeks and a locked door, and a man sat on corridor floors at 2 in the morning, and a garden full of lavender that came back from the dead to arrive fully formed. It fit. 2 days later, Thomas Reed filed the completed case with the Court of Chancery. He came to the estate to tell them in person, which was not something he typically did. And the fact that he came in person told Amelia that this moment was significant enough that he wanted to be present for it. They sat in the library, all three of them, plus Clara, who had simply appeared, and no one had suggested she leave, and Thomas laid out what had been filed with the careful satisfaction of a man presenting work he knew was sound. The case encompassed the fraudulent property transfer, the dissolved trust, the Harrington Holdings transactions, the intimidation of witnesses, and filed separately, as a supplementary action, the conduct of Harlan Voss in his compromise of legal proceedings. which Thomas Reed had constructed with a precision that was almost architectural in its completeness. Edmund Voss will have the option to contest, Thomas said. He will almost certainly choose to. His lawyers will request delays, file objections, look for procedural grounds to slow process. How long? Julian said. 18 months to 2 years for full resolution, Thomas said. Possibly less if he concludes that contesting is more damaging than settling. He won't settle, Amelia said. Both men looked at her. He will never voluntarily admit to anything. He will contest until there is no procedural option remaining. That is how he is built. He would rather lose everything than concede anything. Because conceding acknowledges that he was wrong, and Edmund is not capable of believing he was wrong. Thomas considered this. That is my assessment as well, he said. Which means this is a long road, I know, Amelia said. I told him I wasn't exhausted. I meant it. Thomas looked at her for a moment with the brief, evaluative attention he brought to everything. Then he nodded. Then we proceed, he said. After Thomas left, Clara brought tea without being asked, set it on the library table, and said without inflection or ceremony, Mrs. Blackwood. There are 2 women at the garden gate. They have come before. I told them you were in a meeting, but that you would be available shortly. Amelia looked at Clara. The ones from last week, she said. And a new one, Clara said. Younger. She looks like she has been traveling. Amelia stood up. Julian watched her. Go, he said. She went. She crossed through the house and out to the garden gate. And there were 3 women there, the 2 she recognized, and a younger one she didn't, who had the particular stillness of someone who had been carrying something alone for a very long time and had finally been pointed toward a place to set it down. Ma'am, the younger one said. Her voice was careful, uncertain. I was told someone told me that you listen, and that you know things about what to do when someone has taken something from you that the law is supposed to protect. Amelia looked at her. She thought about 6 weeks ago, a cloth bag with 4 dresses and a broken glass journal and dried lavender and a book of botanical illustrations. A corridor floor, a key. Come in, Amelia said. I'll put the kettle on. You can tell me everything from the beginning. She held the gate open, and the woman walked through. The younger woman's name was Margaret Hale. She was 19 years old, and she had walked 11 miles to get to Blackwood Estate, because someone in the village where she lived had told her that a woman here listened, and that listening had led to something real. She had a bruise on her left wrist that she kept pulling her sleeve over, and she held her tea with both hands, the way people held things when they needed the warmth more than the drink. Amelia sat across from her in the kitchen, not the formal parlor, not the drawing room, the kitchen, because the kitchen was where Clara had put the kettle on without being asked and where the light came through at an angle that felt less like judgment, and she listened. Margaret's story was not Edmund Voss's story. It was smaller in scale and larger in immediacy. A landlord, a lease that had been rewritten after her father's death without her mother's knowledge. A family removed from land they had worked for 30 years on the basis of documents that had appeared from nowhere and been accepted without question because no one had thought to question them. Amelia listened to all of it. When Margaret finished, she looked at her tea and said quietly, I don't know if there's anything that can be done. I needed to tell someone who might understand what it feels like when the thing that's happening to you is illegal and no one around you believes it's worth fighting. I understand that exactly, Amelia said. Margaret looked up. What do I do, she said. Amelia thought about Thomas Reed, about the deed in her travel bag, about standing in a garden telling a man that she was not afraid of his shadow anymore. First, she said, you write down everything you just told me. Every date, every name, every document you saw or were shown. You write it down in your own hand and you sign it, and you keep a copy somewhere he cannot reach. She paused. Then I am going to introduce you to a solicitor who is very good and very discreet. And you are going to find out that you have more than you think you do. Margaret stared at her. That's it, she said. That is the beginning, Amelia said. The beginning is always just writing it down, making it real on paper. Because people like the man who took your family's lease are counting on you keeping it inside your own head, where it can't hurt them. Margaret was quiet for a moment. How did you learn that? She said. The hard way, Amelia said. And then the slightly less hard way, once I had someone in my corner. She refilled Margaret's tea. Clara appeared in the doorway, caught Amelia's eye, and gave the smallest possible nod, the one that meant I have already sent word to Reed's office. Amelia had not asked her to. Clara had simply known. That was what 6 weeks at Blackwood Estate had built. A household that moved toward the right thing without waiting to be told. Julian found her in the garden an hour later. After Margaret had not gone home, gone to a room that Clara had arranged for her to stay in for the night. Because 11 miles was too far to walk back in the dark with nothing resolved. She was harvesting the last of the season's lavender. Working methodically along the south wall, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this long enough that it had become instinct rather than effort. Another one, Julian said. Her name is Margaret, Amelia said. 19 years old, walked 11 miles, she clipped at stem. Fraudulent lease transfer. Her family has worked that land for 30 years. Reed, Julian said. Clara already sent word. Julian was quiet for a moment. She could feel him watching her, not intrusively. Just the way he watched things he was genuinely interested in. With that full, unhurried attention, Amelia, he said. Something in his tone made her hands slow. She turned. He was standing at the garden gate with his hands in his coat pockets and an expression on his face that she had not seen before, not the careful steadiness, not the restrained consideration, something more open. Something that looked like it had been waiting for the right moment for a long time and had decided this was it. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need you to hear it as what it is. Not as an obligation or an expectation, just as something true that you deserve to know. She held the lavender in both hands. All right, she said. When your mother came to me 6 weeks ago, he said, I agreed to the contract because what she described was unjust, and I was in a position to offer something better. That was true. That is still true. He paused, but there was a second thing. A thing I did not have words for at the time, and am not entirely certain I have adequate words for now. She waited. I wanted to meet you, he said, not out of curiosity. Exactly. Something more specific. She described a woman who had been given very little and had made something careful and real out of what remained. Who had kept evidence when keeping evidence required foresight and courage. Who talked to plants and kept dried lavender and read botanical illustrations and had her father's sense of fairness. He looked at her steadily. I wanted to meet that woman, and I told myself it was about the contract and the situation and the justice of it. But that was not entirely honest. Amelia held very still. Julian, she said, I am not asking you for anything, he said immediately. I want to be clear about that. Whatever is here between us, whatever has been building in these 6 weeks, it is yours to decide the shape of. I am not placing a debt on it. I am only telling you the truth because you told me once that you were done with true things going unspoken. She looked at him. She thought about the bell pull, the corridor at 2 a.m, the garden, the first morning, when he had sat on the far side and cleared ground in silence and not asked her a single question she wasn't ready to answer. The business associate who had walked out and been allowed to walk. Edmund's face in the private sitting room when she had stood up and said goodbye. She thought about the word home, arriving without warning in a sentence and fitting perfectly. I know you're not asking me for anything, she said. You have never once asked me for anything. No, he said. That, she said, is one of the reasons. He looked at her. She crossed the garden to him. She stood in front of him, and she looked up at his face, the angular, still face that had gone so quiet the first moment she flinched, that had sat on corridor floors and waited in sitting rooms, and said, You are not standing between yourself and him anymore, and she said, I did not come here knowing how to trust anyone, she said. I came here with a cloth bag and a broken clasp journal and 6 years of learning to make myself small enough to survive. I did not come here expecting anything except another arrangement where I had to figure out the hidden cost. I know, he said. You did not give me a hidden cost, she said. You gave me a key. And a garden, and a corridor floor at 2 in the morning. And you sat in that garden and cleared ground and didn't ask me anything I wasn't ready to answer. And I did not know at the time how rare that was, how extraordinarily. Specifically rare, but I know it now. Julian was very still. I am not a woman who does things halfway, she said. I was not built for halfway. If I say something, I mean it entirely. She held his gaze. So I want you to understand that when I tell you I love you, that it is not gratitude. And it is not relief. And it is not the feeling of a woman who has been without safety for so long that she has mistaken safety for love. I know the difference. I have had 6 weeks to learn it. Something moved in Julian Blackwood's face. Something she had never seen there before. Not the careful steadiness. Not the restrained warmth. Something that had been behind all of it. Underneath everything, waiting for evidence sufficient to trust. He reached up and touched her face, just his hand. Against her cheek, careful and present and entirely certain. I love you, he said. I have loved you since the morning I found you in the garden telling the lavender it would come back. A pause. I was not going to say it until you were ready to hear it without wondering if you owed me something in return. I'm ready, she said. I know, he said. That's why I said it now. She leaned into his hand. And the garden held them in the afternoon light, and the lavender was real and green and alive. And everything that had needed to break was already broken. And everything that had needed to grow was growing. The Court of Chancery ruled 14 months later. Edmund Voss had contested every stage with the tenacity of a man who had convinced himself that if he simply refused to stop moving, the walls closing in around him would somehow not close. His lawyers filed objections. They requested delays. They submitted alternative interpretations of the Harrington Holdings documents that required the court to take 3 additional months to address. But Thomas Reed had built something that did not have weak points. The ruling came on a Thursday morning in February. Thomas brought it to Blackwood Estate himself, which was becoming a habit of his for significant news. He came into the library, where Amelia and Julian were sitting not across from each other in the formal arrangement of people conducting business, but side by side at the long table, going through correspondence together, the way they had learned to do everything. Together, directly, without ceremony. Thomas set the document on the table between them. Complete ruling in your favor, he said. All 5 counts. The property in Dorset is restored to the Whitaker estate. The dissolved trust is reconstructed as nearly as the available records allow. The Harrington Holdings transactions are voided. Damages are awarded to the 3 additional families. He paused. Edmund Voss has been ordered to surrender his current assets to cover the judgments. His soliciting license has been revoked. Harlan Voss faces separate professional sanction proceedings, which I expect to conclude within the next 6 months. Amelia looked at the document. She read the first paragraph, then the summary at the end. Then she put it down on the table, and she said nothing for a moment. Julian was watching her. Are you all right? He said. Yes, she said. And then, because she had always believed in saying the whole true thing, I thought it would feel bigger. I thought when this moment came, I would feel something enormous. But it mostly just feels complete. Like a sentence that has been going on for 6 years finally reaching its period. That is what justice feels like, Thomas Reed said. Not without sympathy. It rarely feels like victory. It mostly feels like the absence of something that should never have been there. She looked at him. The 3 families, she said. Will the damages cover what they lost? Not entirely, Thomas said. Some of what was taken cannot be monetarily recovered. But they will have enough to rebuild, and they will have the legal record. He paused. That matters more than people realize. Having the record. Having a document that says, this happened, and it was wrong. And the person who did it was held accountable. For people who have been told for years that their experience doesn't count, That document is not nothing, Amelia said. It is not nothing. She went to see her mother that afternoon. Catherine Whitaker had sold the Wiltshire house 3 months ago, not in desperation, but in decision, which was a different thing entirely. She had found a smaller house in the village, one with a manageable garden and south-facing windows and no water stain on any ceiling. And she had filled it with the things that were actually hers and left behind the things that had accumulated around Edmund's presence like sediment. She was in her garden when Amelia arrived, not working, just sitting. Amelia recognized the quality of it, the particular stillness of someone who had rediscovered the simple fact of being in a space without having to monitor it. It's done. Her mother looked up. Complete? She said. Complete. Catherine Whitaker was quiet for a moment. She looked at her garden. At the climbing rose she had planted against the south wall, the one Julian had mentioned the variety of that evening at the dinner table, and that had arrived from Blackwood's walled garden 3 days later, with a note from Clara saying the aspect is right. I testified, her mother said. I sat in that room and I said everything I knew and I did not look away from it. I know, Amelia said. You were extraordinary. I was terrified, her mother said. Those are not opposites, Amelia said. Her mother looked at her. Something in her face shifted soft and clear, the way it used to look when Amelia was very small, before grief and fear had put their layers over everything. Your father, she said. He would have looked at you today, and he would not have been able to stop smiling. She paused. I should have told you that more. I should have told you a great many things more. You're telling me now, Amelia said. Her mother stood up. She crossed the small garden, and she held her daughter's face in both hands. You held something you had been careless with, and were determined to be more careful about. You are the best thing I ever did, she said. Even when I was not doing well by you, you were still the best thing. Amelia covered her mother's hands with her own. I know, she said. I know, Mama. It was the first time she had called her that in years. The word arrived soft and certain, like something that had been waiting in a drawer for the right moment to be useful again. Her mother's eyes went wet. Neither of them apologized for it. The twist that no one had prepared for came not from Edmund but from Margaret Hale. Amelia had not expected to hear from her so quickly. Reed had told her that Margaret's case would take months to build, that the fraudulent lease was complicated by the fact that the original had been destroyed rather than forged, which made the evidentiary path narrower. She had settled in for the long work of it. But Margaret arrived at the estate on a Tuesday morning in March with a box of documents and a look on her face that Amelia recognized immediately, the look of someone who has been digging in a place they were told was empty and has found something. My father kept records, Margaret said. She put the box on the kitchen table. Not in the house. He knew something was wrong, I think. Even before he died, he kept records in the workshop. In a tin box behind the chimney breast, she looked at Amelia. 3 years of rent receipts in his hand, letters from the original landlord acknowledging the lease terms. And she paused. A letter from the man who took over the property, dated 6 months before my father died, offering to buy the lease rights from him. Amelia stared at her. Your father refused, she said. He refused, Margaret said. And 6 months later he was dead, and 8 months after that, the lease documents appeared from nowhere, and my family was removed. Her voice was steady in the way Amelia knew very well, the steadiness that was not the absence of emotion, but the decision to let the emotion carry you forward rather than stop you. My father did not have a heart condition, Mrs. Blackwood. He was 43 years old, and he worked land for 30 years, and he was the healthiest person I knew. The kitchen was very quiet. Margaret, Amelia said carefully. I'm not saying I can prove it, Margaret said. I know the difference between what I know and what I can prove. You taught me that. She put her hand on the box. But I can prove the fraud. And I can prove the letter. And I can give Thomas Reed enough to make the right people start asking the right questions about everything else. Amelia looked at the box. She thought about all the things she had believed. At various points were the final edge of what Edmund Voss had done. and then discovered there was more beyond it. Deeper and wider and more systematic than she had initially understood. She thought about Thomas Reed saying he has never had to be careful around people he believed were frightened of him. "I need to get Julian," she said. "I know," Margaret said. She went. The three of them sat in the library that afternoon. Amelia, Julian, and Margaret, with the box between them and a fresh letter to Thomas Reed half-drafted on the table. And Amelia watched Julian go through the documents with the focused attention of a man building a picture from its component parts. He read the letter from the property acquirer, read it again. "Set it down, this man," he said to Margaret. "Do you know his current whereabouts?" "He sold the acquired land to a company 2 years ago," Margaret said. "The company has the same registered address as 2 of the Harrington Holdings subsidiaries that Thomas Reed already identified." Julian looked at Amelia. "Edmund's network," she said. "Wider than we knew," Julian said. "Wider than any of us knew," Amelia said. "Because we were looking at the fraud. We were not looking at what the fraud was built on top of." She thought through it. Not just money land. Specific land. In specific locations. The Dorset property, the Whitaker Trust assets. The lease holdings. He was not simply stealing. He was assembling what? Margaret said. Amelia looked at Julian. Julian was quiet for a moment. "Then there is a rail development planned for this part of the country. It has been in discussion for 4 years. The land required for the route passes through Dorset, through the holdings adjacent to the Whitaker Trust assets, and through the valley where Margaret's family worked." Margaret stared at him. "He was buying the route," Amelia said. "He was stealing it," Julian said. "From people who did not know what their land was worth. Because the rail plans were not public. He had access to the planning documents through his connections in London. And he used that access to identify which land to acquire before the value became apparent." The room was entirely still. "This is not just fraud," Amelia said. "No," Julian said. "It is considerably larger than fraud." "Then why did the Chancery ruling only address the fraud?" she said. "Because we only knew about the fraud," Julian said. "We built the case we had evidence for." He looked at her steadily. "We have different evidence now." Amelia looked at the box of documents on the table. She looked at Margaret, who had walked 11 miles in the dark, carrying a tin box from behind a chimney breast because she believed her father deserved the truth, and so did her family. She looked at Julian, who had agreed to a marriage contract for a woman he had never met because something about the shape of the injustice was one he could not walk past. "Reed," she said. "I'll send for him today," Julian said. "And the families from the Harrington case," she said. "The ones who were awarded damages. They may have land, too. Land they didn't know was targeted." She stood up. "They need to know what we found. Amelia." Julian said her name the way he said it when he wanted her to slow down enough to take the whole picture in. "This is going to reopen everything. It is going to take longer than the Chancery case. It is going to be harder and more public, and Edmund will fight it with everything he has left." "I know," she said. "Are you certain?" She looked at him. She thought about Margaret at 11 miles. About her mother's hands on her face. About lavender that came back from the dead with the right attention. About a locked door that felt like a choice rather than a cage. She thought about a girl who had arrived at a stranger's house with a cloth bag and a broken clasped journal, who had pressed herself against a wall and covered her face and waited for a blow that did not come, and who had spent 6 weeks and then 14 months learning what it felt like when the world organized itself around your survival rather than against it. She thought about what she owed that girl. "I am absolutely certain," she said. 3 months after Margaret Hale's box of documents arrived in the library at Blackwood Estate, the parliamentary inquiry into the fraudulent acquisition of rail corridor land was formally announced. 7 families were named as victims of a scheme that the inquiry's opening statement described as one of the most systematic and sustained abuses of privileged access to public planning information in recent memory. Edmund Voss's name appeared in the first paragraph. Harlan Voss's name appeared in the second. 3 additional men associates whose names Amelia had not previously known, whose connections to Edmund had been buried under layers of holding companies and legal intermediaries, appeared in the paragraphs that followed. Thomas Reed, reading the announcement aloud in the Blackwood Library to an audience of Amelia, Juliana, and a somewhat overwhelmed Margaret Hale, finished the final paragraph and looked up. That, he said, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had done the work and watched it hold, is what it looks like when the full picture is visible. Amelia sat with her hands flat on the table. She did not cry. She did not feel the enormous surge she had half expected at the Chancery ruling the great cresting wave of vindication. This felt like something steadier than that, something that had been building from the moment she had folded Edmund's note and put it in her pocket on her second morning at the estate, and had been building through every document and every conversation and every lavender stem and every woman at the garden gate, and had arrived here as something solid and permanent and weight-bearing. The families, she said. All 7, Thomas said. Named and represented. And the inquiry has access to everything Reed's office compiled? Everything, Thomas said. Your documentation was central. Without the original deed and the Harrington correspondence, they would have had the pattern but not the proof. She nodded. Julian took her hand under the table, not dramatically. Just took it, warm and certain and present, she held on. That evening, after Thomas had gone and Clara had brought dinner and Margaret had eaten more than Amelia had seen her eat in 3 months and gone to bed with the expression of someone beginning to believe that things might actually be all right, Julian and Amelia sat together in the library in the particular comfortable quiet that had become the texture of their evenings. He was reading. She was writing in her journal, the one with the broken clasp, which had not been repaired because she had found, somewhere along the way, that she did not mind things that showed evidence of having been used. After a while she set the pen down. I want to build something, she said. Julian lowered his book. Here, she stated. Something formal. A place where women can come not just to tell me things, but to have access to real help, legal counsel, documentation. Someone who knows how to listen, and someone who knows how to act on what they hear. She looked at him. There are more Margarets. There are more women who know something is wrong and have no way to prove it and know where to go with what they know. I want to build them somewhere to go. Julian looked at her for a long moment. You would run it, he said. It was not a question. Yes, she said. And Reed for the legal side. And anyone else we can find who has the right skills and the right understanding of what these women need. What do they need? He said. The same thing I needed, she said. Someone to listen without calculating the cost of listening. Someone to say what happened to you is real and provable and worth fighting for. She paused. And a locked door. Somewhere that is theirs. Even if just for a night, Julian was quiet. Outside, the wind had come up, the particular sound of an English evening in late spring, full of green things moving. Amelia had learned to love that sound. She had not always loved it, but she had learned. We have the East Wing, Julian said. It has been closed since my brother died. It has good rooms and a garden aspect, and it is entirely separate from the main house traffic. He paused. I have been thinking for 2 years about what to do with it. I could not find a purpose that felt right. She looked at him. It feels right now, she said. It does. She picked up her pen. I'll write to Reed tomorrow, she said. I'll have the East Wing assessed this week, he said. They went back to their respective quiet, her journal, his book, and the evening settled around them the way evenings did when there was nothing in them requiring defense. Nothing requiring monitoring. Nothing requiring the particular exhausting vigilance of a person who had spent years making herself small enough to survive. After a while, Julian said, without looking up from his book, Amelia, yes, she said. I am glad your mother came. She smiled. It was not a complicated smile. It did not have anything in it except what it appeared to have. So am I. 1 year later, the East Wing of Blackwood Estate opened its doors. It was not a grand opening. Amelia had been specific about that. No ceremony, no guest list, no formal announcement in the papers that would have turned it into a social event rather than what it was. It opened the way most important things opened quietly. On a Tuesday, when the first 3 women came through the gate and Clara showed them to rooms, and Thomas Reed's office sent a junior solicitor who had been specifically selected for her ability to listen before she spoke. The lavender in the kitchen garden was in full bloom. Amelia cut several stems that morning and put them in small jars in each of the east wing rooms, because she had found that lavender did something to a room that was difficult to explain rationally, but that she had felt it herself on the morning. She had found it alive in the overgrown garden. It made a space feel like something living had already chosen to be there. And that made it easier to believe that you were allowed to choose it too. Julian came to find her in the garden at mid-morning. She knew his step without looking up now, had known it for months. Could identify it in a full corridor in the dark, against the sound of rain. "How are they?" he said. "Margaret is with the first one," she said. "She is better at this than she knows. She listens the right way. She does not try to fix it while she is still hearing it. She learned from you," he said. She already knew, Amelia said. She just needed someone to show her that it was a skill worth having. Julian crouched down beside her and helped her with the lavender the way he had helped in the garden from the beginning, without ceremony. Without making it into more than it was, just 2 people doing useful work side by side. "Are you happy?" he said. She thought about it honestly. She always thought about things honestly. It was one of the things she had brought with her in the cloth bag, even if she hadn't known it was there. "I am happy," she said. "Not in the way I used to think happiness worked. I used to think it was the absence of the hard things. But the hard things are still here. The inquiry is still going. Margaret's case is still building. There are still women at the gate who have been carrying things too long alone." She clipped a stem. "I am happy in the way that means I have found the work that is mine, and the person I want to do it beside, and the place where I am supposed to be." Julian looked at her. "That," he said, "is the only kind of happiness that holds." She handed him the lavender. He took it. And Blackwood Estate, on a Tuesday in late spring with the east wing open and the lavender in bloom, and a woman in the garden who had arrived with a cloth bag and a broken clasp and 6 years of learning to survive, was no longer known in the county as the House of the Shadow Duke. It was known as the place where broken things came back. It was known as the place where women who had been told their word meant nothing discovered that it meant everything, when written down in the right place and given to the right hands. It was known by the people who had passed through its gates, and the people who had worked within its walls, and the people who had sat in its kitchen with their hands wrapped around a cup of tea, and said the true things out loud for the first time as the place where Amelia Blackwood listened. And Julian Blackwood, the man they had once called the Shadow Duke, the feared and cold and dangerous man of 3 counties, was remembered not for the power he had held, but for the remarkable and particular way he had chosen to use it. Not to take, not to control, not to diminish, but to build quietly, steadily, without expectation of credit, the one thing that every person who passed through Blackwood's gates most needed and had been most consistently denied. A place where they were finally, completely, and irrevocably safe. That was his legacy, and it had begun, as all the most important things do, with a locked door and a key given freely, and a woman who had not yet learned to trust but was finally, in that very first moment, beginning to believe that trust was possible. She had been right. She had been right about all of it. And Amelia Blackwood, who had arrived as a girl sold by her own blood, who had pressed herself against a wall and covered her face and waited for the blow that never came, stood in her garden in the Maylight with lavender in her hands and her husband beside her and a house full of women learning to stand up straight. And she was not surviving anymore. She was living. Fully, deliberately, on her own terms, in a life she had built from the wreckage of what had tried to destroy her. That was not rescue. That was victory. And it was entirely, completely, and forever hers.